At 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, the Middle East woke up to something that may mark the beginning of the most aggressive military escalation in the region in decades. Without warning, waves of coordinated strikes erupted across Iran. Strategic facilities exploded. Radar networks suddenly went dark. Entire command systems stopped responding. Within minutes, it became clear that this was not a limited strike. Defense sources are now referring to the operation as Operation Epic Fury, and early battlefield reports suggest it is unfolding at a scale few analysts expected. In less than a week, more than 3,000 Iranian military targets have reportedly been struck. Electronic warfare aircraft jammed Iran's communications grid, leaving large portions of its defense network effectively blind. Drones that once filled the skies are now dropping out of the air as their signals collapse. Naval vessels that once guarded the Gulf are being pushed beneath the water. But here is the detail almost no one is talking about yet. Most mainstream media outlets are still several hours behind the real timeline of events. While television panels debate possibilities, entire layers of Iran's military infrastructure may already be disappearing from the battlefield. So, before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now, because in this analysis, we're going to break down what actually happened, why it happened so fast, and why some military commanders believe the Iranian regime may already be facing a moment that could redefine its future. In this analysis, I'm going to guide you step by step through what may be one of the most consequential military operations unfolding in real time. Because what happened this morning is not just a series of airstrikes. It is a carefully structured campaign designed to dismantle an entire military system piece by piece. First, I will walk you through the sequence of demands and objectives behind Operation Epic Fury, what military planners appear to be targeting, and why the first wave of strikes focused on Iran's command networks, naval assets, and drone infrastructure. Second, I will outline the immediate consequences that are already beginning to ripple across the region and global markets. We're talking about disrupted oil shipping routes, the growing pressure on the Strait of Hormuz, and why energy prices are already reacting to the possibility of a prolonged conflict. Third, I will present the possible scenarios that could unfold if this operation continues at the pace we are seeing right now, from rapid regime destabilization to a wider regional confrontation involving multiple global powers. And as we move through this breakdown, pay close attention to the patterns behind these strikes, because once you see the strategy forming, the next phase of this conflict becomes far easier to understand. To understand what is unfolding, we have to move beyond the headlines and look at the structure of the operation itself, because military campaigns of this scale are never random. They follow a sequence. And when you analyze the strikes from the past several days, a very clear pattern begins to emerge. This operation appears to be built on three strategic layers, each designed to weaken Iran's military capability in a different way. Condition 1. Blinding the battlefield. The first phase of Operation Epic Fury focused on something most people never see on a map: electronic warfare. According to early reports, U.S. Growler aircraft began jamming Iranian radar and communication systems before the first wave of major strikes even arrived. When those systems go offline, an entire defense network effectively becomes blind. Missile batteries cannot track incoming aircraft. Drone operators lose their signals. Naval commanders suddenly have incomplete information about what is happening around them. Former CENTCOM Commander General David Petraeus once explained this concept clearly during a defense forum. He said modern warfare is no longer just about destroying weapons. It is about destroying awareness. Once a military loses the ability to see the battlefield, every decision becomes slower and more dangerous. And that appears to be exactly what happened here. Iranian drones reportedly began falling from the sky after their navigation signals were disrupted. Command systems struggled to coordinate responses. For several critical hours, Iran's defensive network may have been operating with only fragments of information. If you're starting to see how serious this is, go ahead and hit the like button right now, because the next layer of the strategy becomes even more revealing. Condition 2, destroying the naval shield. Once the electronic systems were disrupted, the second target became Iran's naval presence in the Gulf. This is critical because the Iranian Navy plays a central role in controlling the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow shipping corridor through which nearly one-third of the world's oil supply moves. Over the past few days, reports indicate that dozens of Iranian vessels have been destroyed or disabled. Some of these were smaller, fast-attack craft designed for swarm tactics. Others were larger platforms capable of launching drones and missiles. One of the most symbolic losses appears to be a vessel often described by Iranian media as a game-changing drone carrier, a ship that was supposed to remain at sea for extended periods while launching unmanned aircraft. Defense analysts say the destruction of that vessel sends a powerful message. It demonstrates that the coalition conducting these strikes can reach assets even when they are positioned far from Iran's coastline. Naval historian Dr. James Holmes from the U.S. Naval War College once warned that if Iran's naval forces were neutralized early in a conflict, its ability to disrupt global shipping could collapse almost immediately. And that is precisely the scenario we may now be watching unfold. Without a functioning naval shield, Iran's ability to control the Gulf becomes dramatically weaker. Condition 3. Decapitation of command structures. The third layer of this campaign appears to be the most controversial and potentially the most decisive. Multiple strike packages reportedly targeted underground command facilities and leadership centers connected to Iran's military command structure. These locations are not ordinary bases. They serve as the coordination hubs where strategic decisions are made and orders are transmitted across the military hierarchy. If those facilities are damaged or destroyed, the chain of command begins to fracture. Military strategists often refer to this as a decapitation strategy, removing the leadership structure that directs the rest of the system. Former U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis once warned that when command networks collapse, even large militaries can suddenly become disorganized. Units may still have weapons, but without coordination, they lose the ability to operate as a unified force. Early reports suggest that several senior Iranian military figures may have been killed during the opening phase of the operation. If that information is confirmed, it would mean the campaign is not just targeting equipment, it is targeting the leadership structure itself. Condition 4. Overwhelming air dominance. Once radar networks are disrupted, naval assets weakened, and command systems under pressure, a final advantage begins to appear. Air dominance. This is the stage where the attacking force gains the ability to operate aircraft across the battlefield with minimal resistance. General Petraeus once described this moment as the point where the conflict shifts from contested airspace to near total operational freedom. And according to several defense briefings, that may already be happening. Long-range bombers are reportedly entering the region. Additional carrier strike groups are moving toward the theater. Precision strike aircraft are now able to operate with far fewer obstacles than in the opening hours of the conflict. If those developments continue, the pace of strikes could accelerate dramatically, because once air dominance is established, the number of targets that can be hit in a single day increases exponentially. When you step back and look at these 4 layers together, electronic warfare, naval destruction, command decapitation, and air dominance, a clear picture begins to form. This is not a limited military response. It is a systematic dismantling of an entire military infrastructure. And if the pattern continues, the next phase of this conflict could unfold much faster than most political leaders expected. Now, the question everyone is asking behind closed doors in Washington, Tehran, and several European capitals is simple. What happens next? Because operations like this rarely remain static. They move toward a deadline, a breaking point where one side must decide whether to escalate, negotiate, or absorb the consequences. And based on the pace of the strikes we've seen so far, analysts are already discussing 3 possible scenarios that could unfold if this campaign continues. Scenario 1. Strategic capitulation. In the first scenario, Iran's leadership concludes that the damage to its military infrastructure is simply too severe to sustain prolonged resistance. If radar systems remain compromised, naval forces continue to shrink, and command centers become increasingly vulnerable, the leadership could decide that survival requires a rapid strategic concession. That could involve agreeing to strict international monitoring of military programs, suspending missile deployments, and opening negotiations under heavy global pressure. Former diplomat Richard Haas, who served as president of the Council on Foreign Relations, once noted that regimes facing overwhelming military pressure sometimes choose negotiation not because they trust their opponents, but because the alternative threatens their very existence. In this scenario, the campaign achieves its objective quickly. the strikes stop. The Strait of Hormuz reopens fully. Oil markets stabilize. But this outcome requires one critical factor. The Iranian leadership must decide that continuing the fight is more dangerous than compromise. Scenario 2, partial compliance and strategic standoff. The second possibility is more complicated. Iran could choose to absorb the strikes while offering limited concessions, attempting to slow the operation without surrendering strategic capabilities entirely. In this scenario, Tehran might reduce missile launches, shift military assets deeper underground, and open limited diplomatic channels while still maintaining elements of its deterrent power. Military historian Professor Elliot Cohen of Johns Hopkins University has warned that this type of halfway strategy often creates prolonged standoffs. Neither side achieves a decisive outcome, and the conflict settles into a tense equilibrium. The result would be weeks or even months of intermittent strikes, cyber operations, and economic pressure. Energy markets would remain volatile. Regional allies would stay on high alert, and global diplomacy would shift into crisis management mode. Scenario 3, total escalation. The final scenario is the one that defense planners worry about the most. If Iran concludes that it cannot win a conventional confrontation, it could attempt to expand the conflict dramatically. That might involve targeting oil infrastructure across the region, disrupting shipping lanes, or encouraging proxy forces to open additional fronts. The goal would not necessarily be military victory. It would be raising the economic cost of the war so high that international pressure forces a halt to the operation. Energy analysts are already watching the Strait of Hormuz closely. Nearly 1/3 of the world's oil shipments pass through that narrow corridor. If that flow is interrupted for even a short period, the shock could ripple through global markets almost instantly. That is why the coming days may be the most critical phase of this entire confrontation, because once the deadline pressure intensifies, one of these scenarios will begin to emerge. And whichever path is chosen could reshape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. Right now, the clock is ticking. Operation Epic Fury has already demonstrated something that many analysts once believed would be nearly impossible: the rapid dismantling of key layers of a regional military power in a matter of days. Radar networks disrupted, naval forces weakened, command structures under pressure, and the skies above the battlefield increasingly dominated by one side. Whether this operation ends in negotiation, stalemate, or escalation, one thing is becoming clear: the strategic balance in the Middle East is shifting in real time. But the real question is no longer just about missiles, ships, or airstrikes. The real question is about decisions. Will Iran's leadership choose survival through compromise? Will they attempt to endure the pressure and force a prolonged standoff? Or will they escalate the conflict in a way that drags the entire region into a far more dangerous confrontation? Because whichever path is chosen, the consequences will not remain confined to one country. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Iran's leadership has already gone too far? Or are they now facing the inevitable consequences of their strategy? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to stay ahead of the next developments in this unfolding crisis, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next phase of this story may unfold faster than anyone expects.